Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile, live and in person. There is Nisha, although she's got her bones, so I don't know how. Yeah,
There she was.
there she is. Yeah. So it's Nisha. My name's Daniel Picanti. With me as always,
Prateek Singh.
and well, what are we drinking tonight? First of all,
yeah.
what are we drinking?
So we're trying to finish off the weather foolproof. It's a sad day when you finish off the weather foolproof, but I'm hoping I find another one soon.
Break out the black armbands.
Yeah.
All right. So while Prateek is pouring, I guess I can introduce the topic tonight.
For it.
You Rain Man over here had memorized all of our episodes. So I think you said, what was it, episode 8?
Episode 8 is right sizing.
If you go look at episode 8, it's our episode on right sizing. In that episode, we focused maybe a little bit too much, or maybe solely, on story.
Yeah, we did a little bit of epic right sizing. I think at around minute 20 or something.
Minute 21:32.
Yeah, something like that.
So in this episode, we talk a little bit more about epic right sizing, because we do have, shameless plug, we do have a slicing class coming up.
August 12th and 13th.
I was gonna say not this week, but next week. Probably not the release of this one. So,
Yeah.
But first things first.
Cheers.
Cheers.
If you have your drinks with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. Anyway, Prateek, start us off. What do we want to talk about with epic right sizing?
So I think most flow metrics and sizing activities tend to happen a lot more with stories than anything else. Meanwhile, at least what I have seen is customers are expecting features and rather than stories. And those flow metrics and all those activities that we do with stories are probably even more important to be done at the feature level, at the epic level, of which I think right sizing and watching age, those two things which go hand in hand, are probably the most important when it comes to managing your epics.
But so there's a nuance there, I think, that we need to spend some time, I think,
Mm-hmm.
diving into, because when we talk about right sizing stories, that's one thing, but right sizing epics is actually slightly different. So
Similar but different.
Yeah. It's the same but different. Can you help us understand that nuance? I mean, what's epic right sizing versus what is story right sizing?
So at least the way we have done this in the past and do it currently, story right sizing, which hopefully everyone's familiar with. If you're not familiar with episode 8, you look at your scatter plot of cycle time and you go, hey, 85% of the time I get things done in 12 days or less. Now, this new story I'm picking up, is it going to get done in 12 days or less? If the answer to that is no, let's break it down. Let's right size it. If it starts getting bigger, right size it.
So just to be clear, from a story perspective, we're talking exclusively cycle time. Right sizing is pretty much exclusively a cycle time based conversation.
Right, it's a function of your cycle time.
Yep. Okay, so that's that.
Now you could potentially do the same thing with epic right sizing.
Sorry, I should say cycle time or age. Sorry.
Cycle time or age.
I've already had a few, so I'm. My brain's a bit fun.
Dan showed up for a tasting before we got to this.
So story right sizing, a function of cycle time, but more importantly age. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Now, you could potentially do the same thing with an epic. You could potentially do it based on cycle time or age. It just turns out that you get the signal way too late with cycle time or age with an epic, because the stories get done in 10 days or less, 5 days or less. Features at times get done in 60 days or less, and signal might come way too late for that. The way we prefer to do right sizing on epics is by looking at the number of stories underneath it.
Yep.
So if in the past we've done features that took 12 stories or less, or 10 stories or less to get done, we should expect that our future features will take 10 stories or less to get done.
Yep. And just to make clear a couple of assumptions, hopefully they're obvious, but here we're talking about epics or features as more or less containers of stories. I mean, our work breakdown structures is we're taking an epic or a feature, we're breaking them down into stories. If that's not how you work, obviously, then we need to fall back to something else. But for the most part, I think that's how most people think about work breakdown. So an epic or feature is a number of stories. Okay, so how do I know then, Prateek? I mean, if we think about an epic or a feature as this container of stories, hopefully that all added together, bring about some value. All right, so how do I know if something is right-sized or not then? How do I know that if we think about epic as a number of stories?
Yeah, and we would probably take the same approach we did at the story level. Now, just instead of looking at a scatter plot of stories and completion date versus cycle time, you probably want to look at the scatter plot of completion date versus number of stories. And that would give you, and then you can draw the percentile lines just as you've drawn before. 50% of our features were 10 stories or less. 85% were 15 stories or less. Now we can do the same thing that we've been doing with stories, with features, and go, this is 15 stories or less. Can this new request that came in, can I get it done in 15 stories or less? The answer is no. Let's break this feature up. Use all the techniques that we can use at the story level. You could probably use them at the feature level as well. And then as that feature grows, as it quote unquote ages in stories, we do the exact same thing.
So, I mean, I remember, and you probably remember the details much more clearly than I do. At a company that shall remain nameless, we went through this exercise, right? We went through Jira, we got all the data out of Jira, we plotted all of the epics in a scatter plot, much like Prateek was talking about. Stories per epic. It was, and we drew our percentile lines.
Yep.
And the 85th percentile, I think, came up with 20?
25, 20 or 25, something.
I forget what it was. So we put in place this guidance. It wasn't even a rule, right?
Yeah.
It was just guidance to say, hey, if it looks like your epics, if as you're breaking up your epics or you're discovering stories in your epics, if it looks like it's starting to approach that 20 or 25 story mark, that's a signal that your epic's getting too big and you probably should break it apart. And it was like we had, I mean, I don't even know how to explain. People freaked, right? Like, there's no way, there's no possible way that we can get our epics under 20 stories, and you guys are crazy or whatever.
Well, I mean, I think
that's probably
said that
true.
Before.
That was probably true.
Yeah.
But
you guys are drunk.
To me, this is the funny part about empiricism is it was their data that we were using to come up with that number, and they were coming back to us and telling us, no, this is
cannot be done.
It's not even possible.
Yeah. And we, again, regardless of how much you explain that, hey, this is the data that came straight out of our work management system, it's hard for people to see it because I think most of the time folks remember when things went wrong. That's the Danny Kahneman thing of the memory of something painful is much stronger than a memory of
twice
as loss is twice as memorable or painful as wins are. And folks remember the fact that feature took 80 stories or that other feature took 50 stories. Now those were two features, meanwhile you had 80 other features that were 20 stories or less. So when folks think of putting a limit on something, and I think this is the same thing for WIP limits too, they think of the time that we were so busy, or this one feature was so big, there was no way we could have broken it up.
Yeah, the 200 story or whatever, the name of the feature. Wasn't it 200 stories or something?
I think so.
I was like, oh, no way we could break that up.
Yeah. But, and that's where actually, just again, shameless plug, that's where we started coming up with ways to help teams, some heuristics to help break things up. And that those are the same things that we're going to be talking about in our work slicing class. Yeah.
So bringing this back to forecasting, one of the things we talk about in terms of the importance of right sizing at the story level is then when you go in to start doing Monte Carlo forecasting and things like that, one of the things you can say is, one of the questions that you might ask is, well, all right, how many items can you get done by such and such date? And as we emphasize time and again, Monte Carlo doesn't tell you exactly which items will get done. But it will say, okay, we have an 85% chance of getting 35 things done by this date. But those are 35 right-sized things. And if we're really driving predictability, those are 35 right-sized things. So if we talk about right-sizing epics for forecasting, how does right-sizing epics help us with forecasting when multiple epics will complete by a certain date? Can you walk us through that?
So that's I like to call it capacity planning in 5 minutes, where you literally go, I ran Monte Carlo on stories, and I found out I can do 60 stories, whatever time frame it is, 2 months, 60 stories. And then I have been right sizing features, so I looked at my scatter plot of features, and I found out that my right size is 15. My 85th percentile is 15 stories or less. Math is simple at that point. You go 60 divided by 15, I should plan for 4 features. I have the capability with whatever percentage confidence your story planning was. I'm 85% confident that I can get 4 features done in that upcoming time.
Yeah, no, to me, this is such an important point that I think it bears repeating, two or three times. So when Prateek talks about running the Monte Carlo simulation, it's Monte Carlo the way that we've always done it. Yep. It's a Monte Carlo how many, at the story level. For a given date, you run this Monte Carlo how many, and as Prateek said, for a given confidence level, 70%, 85%, whatever that is, it's going to spit out a number. We can get these many things done. Now remember, it doesn't tell you which ones, but we can get these many things done. If we right size our features, we hope the math is simple. What would you say? 60 divided by 15. If our right-sized epics are 15 stories, 60 divided by 15 is 4. Now, from a planning perspective, it's important to communicate is, all right, 4 is just our plan.
Yeah.
There's a chance we will get more. There's a chance we will get less. And that's the conversation that you need to have, I think, with your stakeholders is because, their immediate pushback will be like, what do you mean only 4? Whatever.
Last time you did 8.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that conversation too. If they did 8 before, they should be able to do 8 this time. But
good thing we're not naming names.
But hopefully they're getting used to a flow-based approach, and they will be able to see that from a we always talk about this in terms of risk mitigation. From a risk perspective, 4 is what you should be planning on. Now we'll do everything we can to pull more in, and there's a pretty decent chance that we will be able to pull more in and get those finished. But stakeholder or product owner or whatever your role is, when you're doing your planning, when you're doing your road mapping, when you're doing whatever that you want to do for the release that we're talking about, this is what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the point that you were making earlier of we're saying 4 right size features. We're not saying which 4 right size features. Hopefully it's your highest 4 priority, but we all know that when we do planning for long term, new priorities will always show up. You'll have interrupts that production is down, so we have to go work on that. Those things will happen. We're just saying we can do 4 right size features, not which 4.
And the reason, and you just made me think. The reason that I kind of like that approach is the problem is saying, oh, well, feature A is 3 stories, and feature B is 7 stories, and feature C is 26 stories, and we're going to add those numbers up and do our forecasting based on that. The reason that's problematic is because feature B that was 7 stories will almost certainly turn into feature B that is 42 stories, right? And so that's why this right sizing approach, I think, is so important. You can't know upfront. Sorry, you're going to say something.
No. You just reminded me of an actual real life story.
Go ahead.
From a feature that, so the system we use to track right now features, we allow folks to put comments to say, hey, Monte Carlo is telling us we can't get this done. But we're okay. We're pretty confident we can get this done. So, and we have the record of comments as they put them. And this was a great example because Monte Carlo said red on May 24th, and the feature was due June 30th. And first comment was Monte Carlo's red, but we're on track. We're good.
So this is a month before it's due, right?
This is
Over a month.
over a
before
month
due,
before
right?
it's due. And then next comment was feature grew from 8 stories to 16 stories. This is the status of all these stories. The next was feature grew from 8 to 16. This is the status of these stories. The next was 8 to 24. This is the status of all these stories. 8 to 32. I don't know why it was in multiples of 8. At least I remember multiples of 8. 8 to 32 is. And finally, on 6/29, on June 29th, was the last comment on the Monte Carlo board. So I went to look at the feature. The feature was now back to 10 stories because they had finally, the day before it was due, split it out and moved the rest of the feature 2 releases down. So I'm glad they split it. The moral of the story is more of let's split it much earlier rather than the day before the release.
They had the information back in May
Yes.
that they should be splitting this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason why I think when Dan was talking about risk mitigation, that's why we're talking about it in terms of risk. It's not saying that you are not capable of doing this. It's saying there is a risk. There's a large amount of risk involved in planning to do this.
Right.
Let's get that early information about risk and then act on it.
And which I think kind of brings us full circle back to the whole point about right sizing and why right sizing is so important, is because we need to be able to design a process. We need to be able to design a system that gracefully handles variability, right? Not all the stories that come through our process are going to be exactly the same size. Not all the epics that come through our process are going to be exactly the same size. And furthermore, we don't want them to be the exact same size. But what we need to do is we need to be able to forecast. We need to be able to plan within I was going to say respectable, but an agreed level of variability.
Yeah.
Because that variability is going to manifest itself as risk, in the forecast. And that's what right sizing is all about, is understanding what is that acceptable level of variability, of risk that we are willing to tolerate in order to be able to deliver something.
Yeah.
And that's why, our forecasts are always, I'm going to say always, are always communicated in terms of that range and that risk or that probability associated with it. It's like, hey, this right size feature, 15 stories or less, it might be 1 story. It is possible to have an epic that's 1 story. It might be 22, right? But we want it to be somewhere between 1 and 15. That is our ideal level, and it can be anything in between there. As long as it's somewhere in between there, we're happy. We've designed a process to be predictable around that. Once we get outside those bounds, now literally, I think we can say literally all bets are off.
Yeah.
At that point, because we don't know. At that point, we don't know.
And that was my point with that example too, that somehow we as a team figured out that we can deliver something with 10 stories, but we figured that out the day before the release. If we are right sizing our features and actively right sizing our features, we would have figured that out a month and a half before that. And that's, I think customers get most upset about, you promised me this thing and you kept telling me it will be there, and then it's not there. Instead of a month and a half ago, go, hey, this thing is at risk. We're going to try to get this done, or we're going to try to give you something that's a smaller piece of this.
Yeah, and like you said, the comments even said that green, even though Monte Carlo was shouting red.
Yeah,
right. So the status that was being reported was green. But that's a whole other thing on empiricism and the failure of rationalism and all that. Okay, so how do we sum this up for people? The importance of right sizing. We've kind of a deep dive into the mechanics of how to do it. So let's bring it back. How do we sum it up? Why is right sizing at the epic level so important? Or
I would go even 1 level up and go, all the flow metrics, all the, not just the metrics, but the techniques of flow that we have traditionally applied to the story level are probably even more important at the epic level, at the feature level, because that's what customers are expecting. And if you want to improve flow, you literally have to do two things, in my opinion. You have to limit your whip and you have to right size things. If you do those things actively, flow will take care of itself. And that taking care of flow is probably even more important at the feature level than it is at the story level.
And let's, I mean, let's not even stop at the feature level.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
we go one level up, the project or product level, even above that, the initiative level.
level,
What, you know what, I mean, it's turtles all the way down. And I think we say that all the time, don't we?
Yeah.
Have we said turtles all the way down?
I don't know if we have, but
Yeah,
take a
but
drink, I guess.
but it is turtles all the way down. So anytime, any part of the organization, any part of the product development lifecycle that you're talking about, and we're not necessarily just talking about software product development, we're talking any product development. Any place that you have flow, as Prateek just said, these principles apply. Anything else? Any final last words for this
Final
episode?
last words? No.
I was going to say, in terms of final last words, this gets much better the more that you drink, I think.
Oh, the weather?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was
Just
gonna say.
we gotta kill the bottle though.
Yeah, we do. It started off a bit iffy, but
No, it's good.
hopefully we will launch this before our right sizing class, and we will put information about how to register for the right sizing or slicing class. Thank you, Prateek. In the description, so make sure to look at the description for that. If you want to learn more about this stuff, as we put this in, we put this hopefully in all our videos as well. Go check out prokanban.org. You can learn about Kanban, you can learn about forecasting, you can learn about all of those things. So for Nisha, she went back on her pillow.
She's on her regular
kind of see. So for the star of the show, for Nisha, for Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Drunk Agile, and we will see you in the next episode.
Take care.
Cheers, everybody. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is a little bit different for us here at Drunk Agile. We are going to be probably neither drunk nor agile today, but we did want to let you know about some exciting things or thing that we have coming up. And you can see just how excited Nisha is there in the background.
We'll be as excited as that.
So Prateek, can you let everybody know what we're talking about?
Yeah, what we're talking about is if you've watched episode 8, which is the episode on right sizing, the technique that helps you improve flow and really get the maximum out of whatever agile method you're using, whether it's Scrum, Kanban, whatever. We're going to be doing a much deeper dive into it. We're putting together a day-long class, actually 2 half days. The first one is scheduled for August 12th and 13th, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into why you should care about right sizing and how you go about doing right sizing. Be a practical, hands-on experience.
Yeah, so we'll put a link to the registration, in the description. We would love to see you tag along and hopefully learn a few things that maybe you didn't know before. But getting these items right-sized is, as we keep saying over and over and over again, one of the key practices that you need to have in order to enable flow. So we look forward to seeing you in the class in a couple weeks. For Nisha, for Prateek, we will be back to our regular shenanigans at Drunk Agile next week. So see you all then. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.